While every empire in human history has fallen, Rome, Byzantium, the Ottomans, the British, one throne has defied the iron law of rise and decline for over 2,600 years. What did the Japanese discover about power that every other civilization missed? In the corridors of power throughout history, there exists an unwritten rule that has governed every empire, kingdom, and dynasty known to humanity. All political systems eventually collapse. The Egyptians ruled for 3 millennia before vanishing. Rome dominated for 1,000 years before fragmenting. The Chinese saw dynasty after dynasty rise and fall in endless cycles. Yet in the far reaches of the Pacific, a political system emerged that would prove this universal law wrong. The Japanese imperial system represents the greatest anomaly in political science, a government structure that has maintained unbroken continuity since 660 BCE, making it older than Christianity, Islam, and most of the world's major religions combined. While Western scholars debate the theoretical maximum lifespan of political institutions, Japan has been quietly running the longest political experiment in human history. What makes this achievement even more extraordinary is that the Japanese throne has survived every type of crisis that traditionally destroys governments. Foreign invasions, civil wars, military coups, economic collapse, religious upheaval, technological revolution, and even total military defeat. Each challenge that would have spelled doom for other dynasties became an opportunity for transformation and strengthening. The secret lies not in military might or economic dominance. Indeed, for centuries, Japanese emperors wielded neither. Instead, they discovered something far more powerful, the art of becoming indispensable without being threatening. This paradoxical approach to power created a political perpetual motion machine that generates its own legitimacy regardless of external circumstances. Unlike Western concepts of absolute monarchy or Eastern ideas of the mandate of heaven, the Japanese developed what we might call quantum monarchy, a system where the emperor exists in multiple states simultaneously. He is both powerful and powerless, central and peripheral, traditional and modern, depending on what the historical moment requires. This flexibility has allowed the institution to survive changes that would have destroyed more rigid systems. The foundation of this immortal dynasty rests on 3 revolutionary innovations that were so subtle, other civilizations never recognized their importance. First, the complete separation of symbolic authority from practical power, allowing the emperor to remain legitimate regardless of who actually governs. Second, the creation of a succession system so flexible it could survive any demographic crisis. Third, the development of what anthropologists call adaptive sacredness, the ability to modify religious and cultural functions without losing spiritual authority. The architectural genius of the Japanese system becomes clear when compared to its contemporaries. When Roman emperors were assassinated by their own guards, Japanese emperors were being protected by samurai who would die before allowing harm to come to their sacred person. When Chinese dynasties fell because they lost the mandate of heaven through natural disasters, Japanese emperors performed purification ceremonies that restored cosmic harmony and strengthened their divine connection. Perhaps most remarkably, the Japanese solved the fundamental problem of political succession that has destroyed more dynasties than war or economic collapse combined. While European thrones sparked continent-wide conflicts over inheritance rights, and Chinese dynasties collapsed when imperial lines died out, Japan created a system where the throne itself was more important than any individual occupant. The emperor became what systems theorists would call a strange attractor, a stable point around which all other political forces orbit. Military leaders, aristocratic families, religious institutions, and even foreign occupiers all found that their legitimacy ultimately depended on imperial recognition, creating a web of interdependence that made the emperor simultaneously the most protected and most necessary person in Japanese society. This system survived its first major test during the Genpei War, 1180–1185, when the entire country erupted in civil war. While the conflict devastated Japan and ended the political dominance of the imperial court, the emperor not only survived but emerged with a new form of power. The victorious Minamoto clan could have eliminated the emperor and established their own dynasty, as victorious generals did throughout history. Instead, they created the shogunate system, governing in the emperor's name while allowing him to maintain religious and symbolic authority. This arrangement revealed the true genius of the Japanese political system. It was anti-fragile, growing stronger under stress rather than weaker. Each crisis forced the system to evolve new mechanisms for survival while maintaining its essential character. The emperor became like water, taking the shape of whatever container held him while never losing his fundamental nature. The religious dimension of imperial power also proved crucial to its longevity. Unlike monotheistic systems, where claims to divine authority could be challenged by religious rivals, Shintoism created a unique form of imperial divinity that was both absolute and inclusive. The emperor was the highest priest of a religion that incorporated all other beliefs, making him relevant to every spiritual tradition that entered Japan. The economic foundations of imperial survival were equally innovative. Rather than depending on direct control of resources, which could be seized by rivals, the emperor derived support from a percentage of all economic activity in the realm. This made him a stakeholder in everyone's prosperity, rather than a competitor for finite resources, aligning his interests with those of his subjects in a way that most monarchies never achieved. The Japanese also solved the information problem that plagued other long-lived institutions. Through careful cultivation of court culture, artistic patronage, and religious ceremony, the emperor remained connected to developments throughout society without becoming entangled in political controversies that could compromise his neutrality. This network provided early warning of potential challenges while maintaining the imperial mystique. In 1274, when Mongol fleets that had conquered half the known world approached Japan's shores, the emperor didn't command armies or build fortifications. Instead, he performed religious ceremonies. 2 typhoons later, the greatest invasion force in medieval history lay at the bottom of the sea. Coincidence? Or had the Japanese mastered something beyond military strategy? The morning of November 19th, 1274, as Mongol ships blackened the horizon off Kyushu, Emperor Kameyama was not in a war room planning defensive strategies. He was in the sacred precincts of Ise Shrine, performing purification rituals that had been practiced for centuries. To Western observers, this might have seemed like dangerous passivity in the face of existential threat. To the Japanese, it was the deployment of their ultimate weapon, the transformation of military conflict into cosmic drama. This response encapsulates the most counterintuitive aspect of Japanese imperial survival, the systematic avoidance of direct confrontation through what military strategists now recognize as the most sophisticated form of asymmetric warfare ever developed. While other empires built larger armies and stronger fortifications, Japan perfected the art of making victory over them either impossible or meaningless. The Mongol invasions revealed the first principle of Japanese political aikido: never meet force with force when you can redirect it entirely. Rather than attempting to match Kublai Khan's military might, the Japanese transformed the invasion into a test of divine legitimacy. When storms destroyed the Mongol fleets, it wasn't interpreted as luck, but as proof that Japan enjoyed supernatural protection that flowed directly from the emperor's sacred status. This victory established a template that would be repeated throughout Japanese history. The transformation of external threats into opportunities to strengthen imperial legitimacy. Each challenge that should have weakened the emperor's position instead became evidence of his special relationship with forces beyond human control. The rise of the samurai class in the 12th century presented an even more complex challenge. These professional warriors possessed the military power to sweep away the imperial court entirely, as military elites had done in countless other civilizations. Instead, the Japanese developed a unique solution: the creation of parallel power structures that allowed samurai to exercise real authority while preserving imperial legitimacy. The shogunate system that emerged after the Genpei War was revolutionary in its sophistication. Unlike simple military dictatorships, it created a symbiotic relationship where the shogun needed the emperor for legitimacy, while the emperor needed the shogun for protection. This mutual dependence created stable instability, a system that could undergo radical changes in military leadership without affecting imperial continuity. The genius of this arrangement became apparent during the Mongol invasions. While the shogun Hojo Tokimune commanded the military response, Emperor Kameyama provided the spiritual framework that gave meaning to the conflict. The samurai fought not just for territory or resources, but for a sacred land protected by divine forces, channeled through their emperor. This transformed ordinary soldiers into religious warriors whose morale was nearly unbreakable. The Japanese also perfected what intelligence analysts call strategic irrelevance, making themselves too valuable to destroy and too marginal to threaten anyone. The emperor became the ultimate non-player character in the game of power, necessary for everyone's legitimacy but threatening to no one's ambitions. This strategy proved its worth during the Ashikaga period, 1336–1573, when competing military clans tore the country apart in constant warfare. While warlords fought for control of territory and resources, none considered eliminating the emperor because doing so would have undermined their own claims to legitimate authority. The emperor remained the one stable point in a chaotic system, gaining importance precisely because he posed no direct threat to anyone. The Northern and Southern Courts crisis, 1336–1392, provided the ultimate test of this approach. For over 50 years, two rival lines claimed to be the legitimate emperor, with different regions of the country recognizing different claimants. In any other system, this would have resulted in permanent division or the extinction of one line through violence. Instead, the Japanese negotiated a solution where both lines were declared legitimate and would alternate on the throne. This resolution revealed another crucial aspect of Japanese political aikido: the preference for solutions that strengthen the system rather than simply resolving immediate problems. By legitimizing both claimants, the arrangement actually increased the overall strength of the imperial institution while ending the immediate crisis. The Japanese also developed unparalleled expertise in what modern strategists call soft balancing, using non-military means to maintain equilibrium among competing powers. The emperor became the center of an elaborate gift economy where military leaders competed for imperial recognition through artistic patronage, temple construction, and ceremonial participation rather than direct confrontation. This system created what economists recognize as a positive-sum game, where everyone could benefit from imperial favor without necessarily reducing others' shares. Unlike zero-sum military competition, the competition for cultural and spiritual status could accommodate multiple winners, reducing the incentive for violent conflict. The period of national isolation, 1633–1853, demonstrated another dimension of Japanese strategic thinking: the use of geographic advantages to create controlled conditions for internal development. Rather than competing with Western colonial powers on their terms, Japan opted out of the global system entirely, using its island geography to create a laboratory for perfecting their unique political arrangements. During this period, the emperor's role evolved into something unprecedented in world history, a sacred figurehead who provided legitimacy for a complex system of distributed governance that included the shogun in Edo, the imperial court in Kyoto, and hundreds of semi-autonomous domains throughout the country. This system was stable precisely because it avoided concentration of power that could create single points of failure. The handling of succession crises also demonstrated Japanese mastery of political aikido. Rather than rigid primogeniture that could lead to civil wars over inheritance, the Japanese developed flexible succession practices that could adapt to demographic realities while maintaining institutional continuity. Adoption, abdication, and rotation among collateral lines ensured that there was always a legitimate heir available regardless of biological contingencies. The emperor's role as the ultimate arbiter of disputes between samurai clans created a unique form of conflict resolution that prevented the total wars that devastated other feudal societies. By maintaining his position above all factions, the emperor could mediate conflicts in ways that preserved the strength of all parties, rather than simply determining winners and losers. Perhaps most remarkably, the Japanese developed techniques for absorbing foreign influences without being dominated by them. Buddhism, Confucianism, and later Western ideas were all integrated into Japanese culture in ways that strengthened rather than threatened imperial legitimacy. The emperor's role as the supreme patron of all beneficial foreign knowledge made him more rather than less relevant as Japan engaged with the outside world. For over 7 centuries, Japanese emperors ruled the most successful empire in history while commanding no armies, controlling no taxes, and making no laws. They were prisoners in golden cages who somehow became more powerful than any dictator. How did they turn complete political impotence into absolute authority? In the winter of 1192, as snow fell on the ancient capital of Kyoto, Emperor Go-Toba faced what should have been the end of his lineage. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the most powerful military leader in Japanese history, had just declared himself shogun, military ruler of all Japan. Every precedent from world history suggested that Go-Toba's days were numbered. Military strongmen don't typically share power with the monarchs they've displaced. Yet something extraordinary happened. Yoritomo knelt before the emperor to receive his appointment, voluntarily creating a system where he would exercise all real power while the emperor retained ultimate legitimacy. This moment marked the beginning of the most counterintuitive political arrangement in human history, a system where apparent weakness became the source of invincible strength. For the next 7 centuries, Japanese emperors would demonstrate that the most secure form of power is the kind that nobody wants to take from you because they need you to have it. The shogunate system created what political scientists now recognize as the perfect separation of authority from responsibility. The shogun made all the difficult decisions, commanded the armies, collected the taxes, and faced the blame when things went wrong. The emperor performed ceremonies, blessed decisions he had no role in making, and received credit when things went right. This division of labor protected the emperor from the political risks that destroyed other monarchies, while maintaining his essential role in legitimizing the entire system. The genius of this arrangement became apparent during the Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281. While Shogun Hojo Tokimune commanded the military response and took responsibility for the outcome, Emperor Kameyama performed the religious ceremonies that gave cosmic significance to the conflict. When storms destroyed the invasion fleets, the victory was attributed to divine intervention prompted by imperial prayers, enhancing the emperor's spiritual authority while the shogun managed the practical aftermath. This pattern of credit without responsibility created an almost indestructible form of political authority. The emperor could never be blamed for military defeats, economic failures, or natural disasters because everyone understood that these were the shogun's responsibility. Yet every success somehow enhanced imperial prestige because the emperor's blessing had made it possible. The emperor's powerlessness became his greatest protection. Throughout the medieval period, samurai clans fought devastating wars for control of the shogunate, but none ever considered seizing the imperial throne directly. Taking the emperor's place would have meant accepting responsibility for governing while losing access to the legitimacy that made governance possible. It was a trade no rational actor would make. Emperor Go-Daigo's brief attempt to restore direct imperial rule, 1333-1336, proved this point by demonstrating why the system had evolved as it did. When Go-Daigo tried to govern directly, he immediately became vulnerable to all the political pressures that the separation of powers had been designed to avoid. His experiment ended in civil war and his own exile, after which his successors wisely returned to the traditional arrangement. The imperial court in Kyoto during the Tokugawa period, 1603-1867, perfected this art of influential powerlessness. The emperor lived in elaborate isolation, surrounded by ceremonies that took on almost mathematical precision. Every action, from the clothes he wore to the direction he faced during rituals, was prescribed by traditions that stretched back centuries. This ritualization made the emperor simultaneously the most constrained and most important person in Japan. The emperor's daily schedule became a kind of performance art that demonstrated his essential role in maintaining cosmic order. He performed ceremonies for the changing seasons, blessed the rice harvest, conducted rituals for the health of the nation, and served as the living connection between Japan and its protective kami. These activities had no direct political impact, yet they were understood to be crucial for the spiritual well-being of the entire country. This spiritual role created a form of authority that was immune to political change. Regardless of which military faction controlled the shogunate, everyone acknowledged that the emperor's ceremonial functions were essential. The rice would not grow properly without imperial blessing. The seasons would not change correctly without imperial recognition. Natural disasters could only be properly addressed through imperial purification ceremonies. The emperor also became the ultimate source of cultural legitimacy. The imperial court preserved classical Japanese culture, poetry, music, and artistic traditions that gave continuity and meaning to Japanese civilization. While samurai focused on military efficiency and merchants pursued profit, the emperor embodied the aesthetic and spiritual values that made Japan distinctively Japanese. This cultural role created networks of influence that extended throughout society. Poets sought imperial recognition for their work. Artists competed for imperial patronage. Religious leaders requested imperial blessing for their temples. Merchants desired imperial recognition for their contributions to society. These relationships gave the emperor soft power that complemented his spiritual authority. The system of retired emperors, Insai, that developed during the Heian period demonstrated how apparent withdrawal from power could actually increase real influence. Emperors who abdicated formally while maintaining informal authority found they could operate more flexibly than those constrained by the ritual requirements of active rulership. This innovation allowed the imperial institution to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining traditional forms. The emperor's role as the grantor of legitimacy created what game theorists recognize as a monopoly on an essential resource. Just as controlling scarce natural resources gives economic power, controlling legitimacy gave political power. Every actor in the Japanese system needed imperial recognition to establish their authority, making the emperor indispensable regardless of his inability to act independently. The imperial court also developed sophisticated intelligence networks that kept the emperor informed about developments throughout the country. Through marriages, artistic patronage, and religious connections, the court maintained relationships with all major families and institutions. This information allowed emperors to exercise influence through carefully timed interventions and strategic silences. The emperor's apparent isolation actually protected him from the intelligence gathering and assassination attempts that plagued other rulers. Because he posed no direct threat to anyone's ambitions, there was little incentive to spy on him or plot against him. This security through irrelevance allowed the imperial institution to survive periods of intense political instability that destroyed other power centers. The development of multiple succession lines also contributed to the emperor's unique position. Unlike European monarchies, where succession disputes could lead to devastating wars, the Japanese system's flexibility in choosing among qualified candidates reduced the stakes of any particular succession. This made the institution more important than any individual emperor, increasing overall stability. Absolutely mind-bending how they weaponized weakness, right? If this paradox of power is blowing your mind, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more incredible historical insights. Comment below. Do you think this kind of system could work in today's world? In 1853, American gunboats forced open Japan's borders after 250 years of isolation. The medieval imperial system seemed doomed to extinction in the face of modern reality. Instead, a teenage emperor engineered the most spectacular political resurrection in history, transforming Japan into a world power in just 50 years. How did they pull off this impossible reinvention? On the morning of January 3rd, 1868, as teenage Emperor Meiji stood before the assembled court to proclaim the restoration of imperial rule, he was attempting something that defied every law of political science. For over 6 centuries, emperors had been ceremonial figureheads with no real power. The samurai class that had dominated Japan for generations still controlled all military force. The country faced existential threats from Western powers that possessed overwhelming technological superiority. Yet this 17-year-old was about to orchestrate one of the most dramatic political transformations in human history. The genius of the Meiji Restoration lay not in revolution, but in strategic reinterpretation of tradition. The movement that overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate presented itself not as radical change, but as the return to Japan's authentic political arrangement. The slogan, "Sono Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, framed the emperor's return to power as the restoration of natural order rather than dangerous innovation. This narrative transformation was crucial to the restoration's success. Instead of appearing as young revolutionaries challenging established authority, the Restoration leaders positioned themselves as conservatives, defending ancient traditions against foreign contamination. This framing allowed them to mobilize traditional loyalty while pursuing radical modernization. The emperor himself became the perfect symbol for this paradoxical project. His youth meant he wasn't associated with the failures of the past, while his ancient lineage connected him to Japan's mythical origins. His personal inexperience in governance was reframed as receptivity to new ideas that Japan needed to adopt. What could have been weaknesses became strengths in the hands of skilled political operators. The Restoration leaders understood that successful modernization required more than simply copying Western institutions. They needed to create new forms that would be recognizably Japanese while being functionally modern. The emperor provided the bridge between these requirements, a symbol that could sanctify foreign innovations while maintaining cultural continuity. The Charter Oath of 1868 demonstrated this strategy in action. While promising radical reforms like abolishing feudalism and establishing constitutional government, the document was presented as the emperor's personal commitment to restoring Japan's ancient greatness. Revolutionary change was disguised as imperial restoration, making it psychologically acceptable to a population that might have resisted naked westernization. Emperor Meiji's public role was entirely unprecedented in Japanese history. For the first time in centuries, an emperor traveled throughout the country, appeared at public ceremonies, and participated in modern activities like railway openings and factory inspections. These appearances created a direct connection between the emperor and his people that had never existed during the isolation period. The emperor's adoption of Western dress and customs served a crucial symbolic function. When he appeared in military uniform rather than traditional court robes, he demonstrated that embracing foreign innovations didn't compromise Japanese identity. His personal example made modernization patriotic rather than treasonous, revolutionary rather than conventional wisdom. The development of state Shinto during this period represented perhaps the most sophisticated example of tradition reinvention in modern history. The Restoration government transformed Shinto from a loose collection of local beliefs into a unified national religion centered on emperor worship. This created a spiritual framework for modernization that made technological progress and imperial loyalty mutually reinforcing. The Meiji Constitution of 1889 achieved the seemingly impossible task of creating a modern constitutional system while actually strengthening imperial authority. Unlike European constitutional monarchies, where royal power was limited by democratic institutions, the Japanese constitution made the emperor the source of all authority, who graciously chose to exercise power through modern institutions. This constitutional arrangement solved the fundamental problem of modernization, how to adopt Western institutions without being dominated by Western values. By making the emperor the ultimate authority who had chosen to govern through parliament, cabinet, and courts, the system maintained Japanese distinctiveness while achieving Western functionality. The emperor's role in Japan's rapid industrialization was equally crucial. Major industrial projects were undertaken in the emperor's name, making economic development a patriotic duty rather than merely a practical necessity. The transformation of peasants into factory workers was presented as service to the emperor rather than submission to capitalism. The creation of the modern Japanese military also followed this pattern of traditionalist modernization. The new army and navy were organized according to Western principles, but swore loyalty directly to the emperor rather than to the constitution or nation. This made military service a form of personal devotion that connected ancient samurai values to modern warfare. Japan's emergence as an international power validated this strategy of emperor-centered modernization. Victories over China, 1894–95, and Russia, 1904–05, demonstrated that Japan had successfully adapted Western technology while maintaining its cultural identity. These triumphs were presented as vindications of imperial leadership rather than mere military achievements. The emperor's international status also underwent dramatic transformation. From an unknown figure in a remote country, Emperor Meiji became a respected world leader whose opinions carried weight in international affairs. This global recognition enhanced his domestic authority, while demonstrating Japan's successful integration into the modern world system. The emperor's role in education reform proved particularly important for long-term social transformation. The imperial rescript on education made loyalty to the emperor the foundation of modern schooling, ensuring that every Japanese child learned to associate learning and progress with imperial service. This created generations of citizens who saw modernization as patriotic duty. The emperor also became the patron of technological innovation, personally endorsing new inventions and industrial developments. His approval transformed potentially disruptive technologies into instruments of imperial glory, reducing social resistance to change while accelerating the pace of modernization. Perhaps most remarkably, the emperor managed to embody both tradition and modernity simultaneously without apparent contradiction. He could perform ancient Shinto ceremonies in the morning and inspect modern factories in the afternoon, each activity reinforcing rather than undermining the other. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over radio waves to announce Japan's surrender, marking the end of the most devastating war in human history. The emperor, who had been worshipped as a living god, now faced occupation, potential war crimes trials, and the likely abolition of his throne. Instead, he orchestrated the most remarkable political transformation of the 20th century. How did he turn total defeat into ultimate victory? In the bomb-scarred ruins of Tokyo during the summer of 1945, Emperor Hirohito faced what appeared to be an impossible choice: preserve his own life and status by cooperating with American occupation forces, or maintain traditional imperial dignity by choosing death over dishonor. What he actually chose was something no other ruler in history had ever attempted: the complete reinvention of monarchy itself. The emperor's decision to embrace defeat rather than resist it confounded both his enemies and supporters. Traditional Japanese culture valued death before dishonor, yet here was the emperor himself choosing survival and cooperation. Western observers expected either stubborn resistance or complete capitulation, but Hirohito chose a third path that would transform not just his own position, but the entire concept of imperial authority. The surrender broadcast of August 15, 1945, was a masterpiece of strategic communication that saved both the emperor and Japan itself. Without using words like defeat or surrender, Hirohito reframed Japan's capitulation as a noble sacrifice for world peace. This narrative transformation allowed the Japanese people to accept defeat without losing face, while positioning the emperor as the architect of Japan's salvation rather than its humiliation. General MacArthur's decision to preserve the emperor proved crucial to both Japanese recovery and American objectives. Rather than seeing Hirohito as an obstacle to democratization, MacArthur recognized him as the key to peaceful transformation. The emperor's cooperation made possible a remarkably smooth occupation that avoided the prolonged resistance and instability that plagued other post-war transitions. The emperor's Humanity Declaration of January 1, 1946, represented the most radical transformation in the history of monarchy. By voluntarily renouncing his divine status, Hirohito didn't weaken the imperial institution, he modernized it. This self-transformation demonstrated that the emperor could evolve with changing times while maintaining his essential role as the symbol of Japanese continuity. The new Constitution of 1947 completed this extraordinary metamorphosis by creating something entirely new in political history: a democratic monarchy where the emperor derived his authority from popular sovereignty rather than divine right. This innovation allowed Japan to embrace democratic values while maintaining cultural continuity through the imperial symbol. Emperor Hirohito's extensive travels throughout post-war Japan created an unprecedented direct relationship between the emperor and his people. For the first time in Japanese history, ordinary citizens could see and interact with their emperor as a human being rather than a distant divine figure. These encounters humanized the monarchy while strengthening rather than weakening popular attachment to the institution. The emperor's role in Japan's economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s provided new relevance for an ancient institution. His presence at factory openings, cultural events, and international ceremonies connected rapid modernization to historical continuity. Japan's success story became inseparable from the emperor's symbolic leadership, giving him credit for the nation's achievements without responsibility for policy failures. The emperor's international rehabilitation was equally remarkable. From being considered a war criminal by many Allied leaders, Hirohito transformed himself into a respected global figure who met with presidents, prime ministers, and popes. His 1971 visit to Europe and 1975 meeting with President Ford demonstrated Japan's complete reintegration into the international community under imperial leadership. The handling of war responsibility showed the emperor's political skill in navigating potentially fatal controversies. Rather than completely denying responsibility or accepting full blame, Hirohito adopted a position of deep regret that acknowledged suffering without admitting legal culpability. This nuanced approach satisfied domestic and international audiences while protecting the imperial institution. Emperor Akihito's reign, 1989 to 2019, completed the transformation by demonstrating that democratic monarchy could evolve even further. His expressions of regret for wartime suffering, emphasis on peace, and accessibility to the public created a new model of imperial leadership that was distinctly modern while remaining recognizably Japanese. The emperor's decision to abdicate in 2019, the first in over 200 years, showed that even the most sacred traditions could adapt to human needs and contemporary values. By retiring voluntarily due to age and health concerns, Akihito humanized the monarchy even further while demonstrating its capacity for continued evolution. Today's Emperor Naruhito represents the culmination of this 75-year transformation. Educated at Oxford, fluent in multiple languages, and married to a former diplomat, he embodies Japan's integration into the global community while maintaining the ancient traditions that define Japanese identity. His reign demonstrates that modernity and tradition can not only coexist, but strengthen each other. The imperial institution's survival strategy during the post-war period reveals the ultimate secret of its 2,600-year continuity: the ability to become whatever each era requires, while never losing its essential character. The emperor is simultaneously the most conservative and most adaptive institution in Japanese society, changing everything while changing nothing fundamental. Perhaps most remarkably, the emperor today enjoys higher approval ratings than virtually any elected politician in Japan, despite having no political power whatsoever. This popularity demonstrates that in an age of political cynicism and institutional distrust, there remains deep human need for symbols that represent continuity, stability, and shared identity. The Japanese imperial system's transformation from divine monarchy to democratic symbol represents more than successful political adaptation. It's a proof of concept for institutional evolution in the modern world. At a time when traditional institutions everywhere face challenges from rapid social change, the Japanese throne demonstrates that survival requires not resistance to change, but mastery of it. The throne, that began in 660 BCE, continues into the 21st century, not as a relic of the past, but as a bridge to the future. Its survival through every conceivable crisis proves that the most enduring institutions are not the strongest or most rigid, but the most adaptive and most necessary. Absolutely incredible how they turned their greatest crisis into their ultimate triumph. If this story of impossible survival has blown your mind, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more amazing historical revelations. What's your take? Is this the greatest comeback story in political history? Let us know in the comments below.